And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan, as we were going to break, you were gearing us up to figure out what's going on with the John Brennan investigation.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully something, right? Because we've been waiting a long time, and it seems to me that there's a little bit of an element of two sets of rules. So when the Democrats were running the investigations of President Trump, there was none of this concept of, we don't want to politicize the Justice Department. We don't want to politicize the intelligence services. We don't want to politicize this investigation, right? There was none of that because it was all politics. It was, we've got to do whatever we got to do to get this terrible man out of office who shouldn't have won. If you wanted to count a different way, which is not the way we count, but if you wanted to count the popular vote, he didn't really win. Hillary Clinton won, and this was unfair. And heck, he probably only did it with Russian help. I mean, we've heard this conspiracy for years now, and of course, all that's been put aside. But then we've got Bill Barr comes in, and then there's this overarching concept of we're not going to politicize the investigation of the investigators. So that's where you see Bill Barr coming out and saying, you know what? Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they're not even part of the investigation. We're not looking into them at all, despite the evidence that they were right in the thick of setting up General Flynn. And there's good evidence of that that's in the public domain. So there's been a degree of concern about the John Durham investigation as to where is it exactly going, because there's a lot of talk on social media that, you know, something is coming from that. We're going to see indictments. We're going to see somebody held accountable. Now, you know, if you listen to this show for a long time, we closely follow one of our top sources is a blogger who does excellent work and analysis, and he's analyzed a lot of this. And, you know, what's funny is that recently he's actually gotten himself inserted into this process, and that's Sundance. So if you follow it closely, you know who Sundance is. If you don't, you're probably scratching your head wondering what I'm talking about. But Sundance actually went to Washington, D.C. and presented the evidence that he had to various members of the Department of Justice, to various politicians and other people involved. We don't know exactly who he met with. We know some of the people that he met with. We don't know everybody that he met with. But he's been doing this, and he outed Durham's lead investigator, which is a guy named William Aldenberg. And apparently he sat down with that gentleman who's an FBI agent doing the investigation, and he laid out all his evidence for him. And according to Sundance, these were things that the investigators were not aware of. You see what I'm saying? They were not aware of it. So Sundance has been tracking this for years. His analysis has been spot on. It's backed up by the documents. None of these investigators are even aware of the documents. They're not aware of his analysis. They're not aware of so many important facts and things that went on. And according to Sundance, one of the reasons for that is that they've got this DOJ policy that William Barr has put in place that says that they cannot receive, accept, or deal with any evidence coming from the political sphere, which means all these congressional investigations, which did yield a lot of documents, although it took a long time to get them. They were parceled out over many years, and all that is to keep us from actually figuring out what happened. But ultimately, they have yielded a certain amount of documents and information, which is what Sundance has used to perform his analysis. But a lot of that, apparently, the DOJ investigators won't look at because it came out of the political sphere. So this is a new set of rules that's been put in place. Well, if you've got the investigators, they're not looking at big categories of evidence. They don't see the big picture. They don't even understand the coup that was attempted by the intelligence service to take out the sitting president, other than by an election, by a peaceful election. They wanted to do it. Granted, it wasn't a violent coup, but they wanted to remove the sitting president, and they wanted to do it for a false reason. But the investigators, Durham and his team, apparently don't even know about this. So that is a little bit disheartening. But the good news is Sundance has gotten to them. And he shared the information, and according to Sundance, they understood what he shared with them. So lo and behold, all of a sudden, last week, John Brennan gets put in the hot seat. And if you'll remember, Kevin Kleinsmith just pleaded guilty to one count of making a false statement, which he certainly is guilty of more than that, significantly more than that. And the hope is that he got an easy sentence, a light sentence, a plea deal to cooperate with investigators. Now, we don't know for sure that that's what's going on, Because if we remember back to the Michael Flynn case, they tend to hold off on sentencing until after your cooperation is completed. So they're actually a little bit ahead of schedule on Kleinsmith, which could tend to indicate that maybe, that's not what they're doing with him, that they haven't cut a plea deal with him for cooperation. At the same time, they put John Brennan in the hot seat last week on Friday for 8 hours. Now, we knew he was going to be interviewed on Friday. I didn't think it would be for 8 hours. That's a long interview. Now, shortly after the interview, his spokesman, Nick Shapiro, longtime John Brennan spokesman, came out and posted a statement basically saying that Brennan was happy to participate in the investigation and basically set the record straight. And he was glad to know that John Durham has told him he is not a subject or a target of the investigation, meaning he's not somebody against whom they're seeking some kind of criminal liability. Now, the question, though, becomes really, when was that told to him? What is he repeating? Is he repeating something they told him on Friday? And, oh, by the way, that is not binding, right? Because the guy is clearly perjured himself in the past before Congress, in his testimony to Congress, where he said they didn't use the dossier in the intelligence community assessment, that it wasn't really part of it, when that was this central piece of the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment. That was the Intelligence Community Report on Russian interference in the election, if you remember that, going back to 2017. So we don't know exactly what happened Friday, and we probably won't know for a while, but certainly John Brennan was in jeopardy on Friday. He was in what would be potentially a perjury trap, because we already know many facts about what he did. There have already been testimony about his involvement in pushing the dossier into the ICA.
In 8 hours, you can get a lot of stuff.
You can get a lot of stuff in 8 hours. That's right. So we just don't know what all they went over and what may have happened in that. I hope something comes from this. John Brennan's clearly one of the ringleaders of that entire investigatory coup that they tried to create against President Trump. So, hopefully the pressure is building. Hopefully, we know for sure now, because we know Sundance, he has put it out there, and if you're interested in going to his site, you can read up on all this. It's got extreme levels of detail. He sat down with Bill Aldenberg and had a meeting and went over all this stuff. So we know now that DOJ knows exactly what happened. The investigators, the John Durham team, they didn't get onto it very quickly, admittedly, but they now know exactly what happened. So if they don't do anything about it, well, that's going to be on them. It's not going to be great for us, but hopefully this spurs them to do something about it, hold somebody accountable, because just like Devin Nunes has been saying for well over a year, somebody needs to go to jail for this. If somebody doesn't go to jail for this, then we don't have a justice system in this country. We really don't have somebody has to be held accountable for what they tried to do, to try to misuse our intelligence services against a candidate and then a sitting president. All the power of the federal government used against the duly elected president of the United States.
So that what you have to think about as a citizen of this country, that when someone is elected and running for office, that person is being essentially vetted by a previous administration. That's not right. That's not how things work.
Right. Well, look, if there's a legitimate investigation, that's one thing, right? And there was a possibility of a legitimate investigation. But then you would go to the person, you would have what they call a defensive briefing. You would let them know, hey, we think the Russians are trying to infiltrate your campaign. So we want to talk to you about some of that, and please let us know, what kind of information, kind of feedback you have about that. In other words, let's work together the same way they worked together with Carter Page, who for years was a CIA asset, who would tell them about the approaches from Russians, because he was over there doing business and dealing with them. He would tell them about the Russians that were approaching him and the kind of things that they were trying to arrange with him.
In an unbiased country, would be that way, but it's not.
That's what they've done with other politicians that they've had in these counterintelligence investigations. But the point is, what we all know, they were out to get President Trump by any means necessary. And that's the whole of the story. It's not that complicated. All the details are complicated, and the way they went about it is complicated. It makes it hard to explain to lay people because of the thickness of the details that you have to get through. And that's why these briefings from Sundance are, hundreds of pages long with documents and backup and everything else.
Do you think that's why we don't see it covered in the mainstream news as often?
No, I think it's strictly the political reason that we don't see it covered in the mainstream news, because they're capable of analyzing this, and you can anchor to enough key facts to have a line of stories that do tell the complete story. I mean, we've seen major investigations before. Like how about the CIA drug smuggling investigation back in the late 90s? I think it was called Operation Dark Alliance was the name of the series of newspaper articles that were in the San Jose Mercury News and Observer that went through how the CIA was bringing crack cocaine into Los Angeles in the 1980s, which sounds, to most people that probably sounds crazy. But this serious investigation went through. They had the documents. They linked to it. It was the first truly interactive story on the Internet. So it is possible for them to peel this apart. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.